Today's guest grew up in Upington, South Africa. He studied law and commerce at Stellenbosch University, where he was a resident in Wilgenhof. After graduating, he became an advocate before buying a controlling stake in Pep, which along with its spin-off Shoprite, he would go on to grow to be one of the largest retailers on the African continent. In addition to this, he has been involved in mining, consumer brands, and a voice against apartheid. He now stands as one of South Africa's most successful businessmen and one of the wealthiest people on the continent. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Christo Wiese.
Nice to meet you, Aiden.
Christo, thanks for being here. So I want to start with Upington.
Yes.
What was it like growing up there? It's a very small town, not much going on from what I understand. So, I mean, did you always have big aspirations there? What was it like?
Well, Upington was, when I grew up, a rather unique town in many ways. It was a real frontier town, mainly a farming community, but also a very vibrant business community. And it was a tough area, prone to droughts, and then the people farming along the Orange River, or the Garib, which is the proper name, often prone to floods. So it was a tough world. It was far away. The roads from Upington to Cape Town and Johannesburg were mainly unpaved roads, gravel roads. It took a long time to travel. And you felt a little bit isolated. But that was actually a very good thing, because it was a community that realized that they had to rely on each other. And that was, part of what made Upington a very special place. The second thing which made it special, and that still applies today, it's an extremely neat town. Everybody there, because they're close to the river, people have nice gardens, and they keep the town very clean, very neat. When somebody has a garden that is not neat, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So you learned certain very basic values very quickly.
Do you think it's better to grow up in sort of a smaller community? I feel like in some sense it's almost difficult to realize what's out there in the world when you're in a smaller setting, but at the same time, you know everyone a lot better and it's easier to build something.
Well, look, I think it's very difficult to say there's a binary choice, small town, big city. My kids grew up in a city, and I hope they have the same values that I have. But certainly the one thing I am convinced of, I would not have changed the area where I grew up for anything in the world.
Yeah.
I think, it was a wonderful life.
Okay. And so then after you grew up in Upington, you went to school in Paarl.
Yes.
And then you went to UCT for a year.
Yes.
And then you left.
Yeah.
What happened there?
No, it's very simple. I was 16 years old in matric. I turned 17 when I wrote my exam. So when I got to UCT, I was 17 years old, a kid from the Platteland, from Upington, and suddenly I was in a big city and at a big university and English language, and I come from a very Afrikaans background, although Boys Eye was a parallel medium school. And I was just too young. I was, irresponsible. I mean, we just thought about chasing girls and playing snooker and having fun.
How do you think, because I mean, you're not the first person to encounter a problem like that. There's lots of people who go to university and they struggle in their first year. How do you then take that and not let that possibly get to you and lead you down the wrong path?
Well, it's an interesting question, because some of my friends who had a similar experience, they did go on the wrong path. They never sort of came to the conclusion, as I did, that, your childhood is over. When you get to 18, 19, 20, you've got to start thinking very seriously about where do you want to head in life. Fortunately, I, at the age of 19, 20, realized that life is a bigger challenge than just hanging around in Upington and having a great time with my friends.
And I'm assuming that's then what led to you. So you then go into Stellenbosch University, where you then join Wilgenhof, and you studied commerce and law. And how was that? How were the relationships you built there, and just the experience that you had there? How did that build a foundation, do you feel, for your future?
Well, in Wilgenhof, as I told you earlier on, the culture was really great for young men. You had certain values reinforced. You made very good, created great friendship bonds. You developed this kind of loyalty to the institution, to Wilgenhof. When I got there, Wilgenhof had gone through a period where it had distanced itself from the rest of the university. And it's something that the university community kind of has always held against Wilgenhof. But in 1965, the then primarius came to me and said that Wilgenhof for 10 years never had a representative on the Students' Representative Council, on the Studentenraad, because they were sort of withdrawn, but they want me to be a candidate. So I claim that bit of credit, that I then became a member of the SRC and became chairman of several of the committees, the Carnaval Committee and various others, and kind of helped to reintegrate Wilgenhof into the larger university community.
Yeah. And so do you think, now obviously Wilgenhof's encountered some troubles in recent times.
Sure.
We can talk a bit more about it later, but do you think it's better for them to be more integrated? I mean, how
Undoubtedly. I mean, that decision was taken way back in 1965. But as I say, there was always a lingering, slight anti-Wilgenhof feeling, because Wilgenhof was seen as being a little bit apart.
Yeah.
And even although we got fully back into, being on this SRC and playing a more participatory role, certainly in terms of sport, Dr. Craven got all these promising young players, not only to come to Stellenbosch, but he brought them to Wilgenhof, who became Springboks, Morne du Plessis and all the others, Andy van der Walt and some of those guys that I knew very well.
Yeah.
So, undoubtedly, Wilgenhof should not be a part. It should be part of the campus.
Yeah. And was there anything that you did differently? You'd been to UCT, it hadn't really worked out, you're now at Stellenbosch. Did you approach it with a different mindset? Very much
a different mindset. Well, I was more mature.
Yeah.
And I saw the world differently. And being in a place like Wilgenhof, you just became more disciplined as a young guy. I mean, we were like most guys of that age. I had wonderful friends, but we were a pretty wild bunch. But we enjoyed our lives, but we also all graduated and did our thing.
Yeah. And while you were at Wilgenhof, you end up joining the family business, which at that point was sort of the beginning of what became Pep.
Yes.
And so you left university, you became an advocate, and then you joined the family business. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how was that? Was that sort of your parents saying, "Hey, Christo, you've got to come," or was it something you wanted to do?
No, it was something when the business Pep was founded by a cousin of mine, a cousin by marriage. My father, who was then already in his 60s, at my suggestion, decided to sell his business and invest in this business. And the founder then said, "That's fine, my dad can become the second largest shareholder, but on condition that I join the business when I graduate."
Okay.
So it was part of preordained. And I loved it. I loved the business.
Yeah.
But I stayed there from 1967 until 1974. In 1972, we listed the company. So it was now a public company, not anymore a family company. And I decided then that I wanted to go and do what I thought was my first love, go to the bar and practice as a barrister,
Okay.
which I did. So I left for 4 or 5 years. I
Yeah.
practiced at the Cape Bar.
And then during that period that you left, you ended up as well going into politics a little bit.
Correct.
And you did something very unpopular at the time,
Yes.
which was you sort of ran against the National Party, which was the party of power. Right?
Well, it was an interesting situation. Van Zyl Slabbert. Now, let me tell you this, because I have told people this before. My wife's dad became a member of parliament the year she was born. And by that time, he'd been a member of parliament for 30 years. So when I married her, she told me that I may never go into politics. She'd had enough of politics. But then when the election was called in 1977 by the National Party government of Vorster, my late father-in-law was the chairman of the caucus of the opposition. And Van Zyl Slabbert was my friend, and they asked me to be a candidate for the PFP, which was the opposition party, the forerunner of today's DA.
Yeah.
And I could choose which constituency I wanted to be a candidate in, and my wife relented and said, no, it's fine. I can be a candidate for parliament. And the constituency I then chose was represented by a chap called John Wiley, and he and I were both originally United Party members. But the United Party split in 1974. Some of them became more to the right, like John Wiley, who ended up becoming a nationalist, and some to the left, which is where I was. And so there we were fighting each other, both from the United Party background, but he leaning towards the National Party and I leaning, obviously, towards the so-called progs at the time.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting battle.
And then, I mean, what was the experience like in politics? And then, because then you eventually obviously left politics. Yeah. Why then leave afterwards?
No, well, look, I lost the election to Wiley because it was a snap election. I did reasonably well, bearing in mind that he'd been the sitting member for 20 years or more. And in a short election, I did reasonably well, but I lost. And then I thought, well, that's it. I've had my run at politics, but that's enough.
Yeah.
I'd rather concentrate on my business. During that time, I bought a diamond mine, which was very successful, and my business interests grew. So I knew that, my road was to try and make a difference through business.
So because at this stage you're still quite young. How did you organize the financing to buy this diamond farm?
Well, very interesting, but that's quite a long story. But I suppose, I was lucky, and I was, adventurous. I wasn't scared. I had perhaps too much confidence, but it worked.
Okay. And then, how was it? So you buy this diamond mine, and so you're in the mining business for a while.
Yeah.
And then eventually you do quite well there, and you decide to sell the mine and go back into the family business.
That's correct.
So you buy yourself back into the business.
Yes, I bought control of the business.
You bought control of the business, and now you're controlling the business. And at this stage, how big was the business when you?
Well, when I joined the business, we had 200 shops in Pep. When I went back, and at that time, Pep had just bought Shoprite, which then had 9 stores, run by Whitey Person, who was in Wilgenhof with me. We're very close friends. Also come from the same political background. His father was also a United Party member of Parliament. And I knew them, and I knew Whitey very well. But it was a small business. Shoprite had 9 shops, and Pep had something like 200 shops. Now, just to put it in context, today Pep has over 6,000 shops, And Shoprite, which is the largest retail business in Africa, has something like 3,500 shops.
Yeah.
So the business grew very rapidly. I had wonderful colleagues, Whitey and others, and we worked well together. We also had our ups and downs through all the political upheavals in the 1980s, 1990s, but we always managed to get out on the right side.
So as you're coming into the business, you've now bought a controlling stake. What was the strategy going in terms of you've now bought this controlling stake? It's cost you presumably a lot of money, especially at that time.
For those days, yeah.
And now what is the strategy you want to implement to grow? Were you looking at franchising? Was it sort of, we'll just see how things go, continuing what had been going? Was there anything in mind?
No, we had very clearly developed business models during the time of Renier van Rooyen, the founder, with whom I worked very closely. So obviously we tried different things. We tried certain models that didn't work. We launched certain businesses both here and in the UK, which weren't successful, which we ultimately sold. But the main businesses did extremely well. They had a very clear business plan, and therefore both those businesses are the largest of their kind on the African continent, both Pep and Shoprite, and they are the largest private sector employers in South Africa. Between those two businesses, they employ over 200,000 people.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah.
And how did you, so because you're one of the largest employers, but this was also a very turbulent time for South Africa.
Sure.
In which you were in charge. How did you manage the transition from apartheid, and how did that possibly affect how you ran the business?
Well, with what I learned when I grew up in Upington, that things go up and down. You have droughts, you have floods, you have rain, you have moments that you've got the wind at your back, and then you have other times and you just deal with it.
Yeah.
Plus, I am an unqualified South African optimist and an African optimist. I believe there are wonderful opportunities in this country and on this continent, and I love it. I mean, my family had been in South Africa for more than 350 years, so I am an African.
Yeah.
And I happen to have a white skin, but I'm an African. And I love the country, and I taught my children to love the country. I've got 3 children. My son was also in Wilgenhof. And all 3 of them studied abroad, first in South Africa, and then in England, Italy, Canada, America. But they all came back home. They're all here.
And how is it, so leading a business, you were chairman for most of your time, would that be correct?
Yeah, since 1981 until 2017.
Yeah. How does it, for maybe people who don't understand the corporate structure, how does the role of chairman and CEO possibly differ, and how do you manage that role? And sort of, because chairman is slightly more hands-off than a CEO, so finding the right people to trust and to implement the strategies you want to push.
Yeah, well, first of all, finding the right people is more luck than wisdom. I was very lucky. I had Whitey Besson in Shoprite, a friend, a close friend, confidant. We lived in the same world. And I had other very good colleagues in Pep. And I always stress the point, finding those people is more luck than wisdom, because I also happened to find Jooste. But yeah, having that family business background made it much simpler. It was much more informal, that everybody knew there was one guy that ultimately called the shots, and that was the controlling shareholder, who happened to be me. But I was also a friend and a colleague that grew up with everybody.
Yeah.
Wasn't imposed from outside. So it was a wonderful culture in the business. And that made it grow so well.
How do you, because I mean, especially nowadays, I think CEOs, they seem to be getting churned quite often. And sometimes it's, the board, when you're implementing a CEO, obviously they need some sort of leeway to implement the plans they want to.
Yeah.
So how do you decide, okay, we're trusting you, or at what stage do you say, okay, your time's up, we now want to see someone else? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, look, today, my business involvement today is in many respects different from what it used to be. We today control companies like Bright and Premier and Virgin Active and so on. And it is a different kind of relationship. But the basic rules remain the same. It works best when there are people in the arena who have to deal with every problem every day. And there are people whose money is in the game, but they're a little bit more distant. And I think it's that recipe kind of works, provided everybody lives on the same planet.
Yeah. And how do you feel, I mean, businesses come and go.
Yeah.
You've been around for a while now.
Yeah.
And your businesses, they don't look like they're going anytime soon, right? I mean, Checkers is now...
Sure.
They've done very well recently. Yeah. Shoprite's doing very well. Pep's doing very well. How do you or business owners work to keep your business relevant over such an extended period of time?
Well, of course, there are a lot of factors at play if you want to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, the simple answer is you've got to have the right people around you. Okay. It's all about people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And leadership. Yeah. And culture.
Mm. And okay, so you've grown Pep and Shoprite now, and you've done very well. And then a man by the name of Marcus Euster comes into the picture.
Yeah.
How does he come into the picture? What's the first introduction with him?
Well, I've often told the story in interviews and over the years since the Steinhoff disaster. I got to know him in the 1980s when he was an article clerk for a firm of auditors that did some of my accounts in the diamond mining business. And I spotted him as a bright young guy. He was very bright. But I lost touch with him for like 20 plus years. But I took note of what he appeared to be building, because he had been running this fraud, as it now appears, for like 20 years, making the business look much better than what it actually was. And he managed brilliantly to get past all the gatekeepers, the banks, the auditors, the ratings agencies, the institutional investors. And I'd reached a stage in my businesses where, due to the Competition Commission constraints, we couldn't really grow anymore in South Africa. There was nothing that we could take over. So I was looking for a way of internationalizing our businesses. And I looked what he was doing, and it appeared that they were doing the right things. They had strong balance sheet on the face of it, and great businesses all over the world. And I thought it would be a very good idea to reverse my business interests into Steinhoff, but still leaving me in control at the end.
Yeah.
And that's the structure we put together. And everything was going very, very well until the horrible truth emerged.
And were there ever any red flags for you? I mean, there were some people who said Marcus lived quite a extravagant lifestyle.
Well, he did, but it didn't really bother me. I don't live an extravagant lifestyle. But it never bothered me because, I saw what he was earning, and I saw, what his balance sheet looked like, apparently. So there was no indication that he was living beyond his means. Yeah. Today we know that he was, defrauding and stealing to maintain his lifestyle. But it didn't bother me. We were never friends. I mean, he never came to my house. I never went to his house. We were business associates. But there was nothing that I saw. Today, looking back, I think there were one or two signs that I should have been more wary of. But, that's with the benefit of hindsight.
What do you think of, because I've lived quite a while of my life in Joburg, where you often see people driving around in convoys.
Sure.
And very flashy, and often they're not as high profile as you think they are.
No.
And then Tembisa Hospital things come out.
That's right.
What do you think? I mean, you're one of the wealthiest and you don't live a fancy lifestyle. What do you think when you see those people? Do you think maybe it's time I buy a convoy?
No. I've never been, some of my friends lately in the past few years had their cars, armor plated.
Okay.
And they come to me and say, but Christo, why don't you have a driver and why don't you have your car? I said, bullshit, man. I'm not going to live that way. I'm not going to live in a prison, have guards around me, bodyguards and armored cars. I don't believe in that kind of nonsense.
Yeah. And you think Cape Town's still safe place to be?
Cape Town is as safe as anywhere on the earth. I mean, there are places in London where you won't go after dark, but you won't go during the day.
Yeah.
So that's all over the world. I mean, Cape Town is no different. People have these images of things. Obviously, I live in a very open area. I live on the beach in Clifton, my home. I've lived there for 52 years. It's all open. You can't have huge walls and gates and things. So we have security. We pay for security. But it's still a hell of a lot cheaper than living in London or one of these other places where you also, if you are a little bit above the average income, you've got to be careful.
Yeah. It's quite a shame because I know a lot of people I speak to from overseas, they've almost been fear-mongered into thinking South Africa is this terrible place.
No, but they're so misinformed.
Yeah.
I mean, they should just look at the statistics.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, as I say, there are places where you shouldn't go, gang-infested areas. I mean, I feel desperately sorry for the people who have to live there. But you're looking for trouble if you go to places where you shouldn't be. But for the rest, I mean, we've been living in the same house for 52 years. It's absolutely open. My children live there. They grew up there. My grandchildren are there. And we don't live in fear.
Yeah.
We're careful. I mean, as I say, I employ, together with my neighbors, a security company that patrols and so forth, and touch wood. Yeah. We've had no incidents.
And so coming back slightly to the Steinhoff thing, so while this was all going on, you had wrapped Pep into Steinhoff.
Yes.
But Shoprite was still separate.
Yes.
And there was a stage where you wanted to wrap Shoprite in.
Sure.
And Whitey, I think, was the one that said no.
No, Whitey didn't say no. He didn't like the idea, but I mean, he couldn't stop it. I mean, I had the controlling shares in Shoprite, so I could do with my shares whatever I wanted to. But Whitey didn't like the idea because he never liked Jooste. He was very, very critical of Jooste's lifestyle. I mean, it didn't suit him at all.
Yeah.
And so he didn't like Jooste, he didn't like the way Jooste did things, but none of us suspected that Jooste was a crook. Nobody.
Yeah. And what was the conversation with him like after?
No, well, I mean, we're friends, we're very good friends to this day, and I said to him, Whitey, yeah, you were a better judge.
Yeah. And what was this investigation, or I mean, this news breaks? What was, I know you stepped in for a week as CEO and then you stepped down.
Yeah.
What was that month like for you in your calendar on the day-to-day?
Extremely difficult. But I've often explained to people that when this happened, you must remember, I was then 76 years old. That's not an age at which you want that kind of disaster to happen.
Yeah.
If I were 30 or 40 years younger, I mean, it would have been water off a duck's back. But at that age, it was a big thing to deal with. It came suddenly. And I've explained this to people. I had to look myself in the mirror and say, now, how are you going to handle this? And I took 3 decisions. The number one, I don't mourn the loss of money. I lost what by most people's estimate is a fortune. I lost 60 billion rand, and which I'd worked for 50 years. And I really did work hard. But I don't mourn the loss of money. I mourn the loss of people, friends, relatives, but not money. Money comes and goes. And the second thing, and this is what my mother taught me from a very young age, is count your blessings. And I looked around me and I said, well, my lifestyle won't be affected by the loss of that money. I could maintain my lifestyle. I have a wonderful family, wonderful children, wonderful grandchildren. I've got wonderful friends. I live in the most beautiful place on earth. Yeah. So I count my blessings, not regretting what I'd lost. And thirdly, I decided I wasn't going to become a bitter old man. There's a lot of people who suffer that kind of setback, become very bitter. They don't trust anybody. They live in fear. I took the direct opposite route. I put together my family office. I had some very bright people joining me. My son is in the office with me. My 2 daughters are there, my sons-in-law, grandchildren, and everything is honky-dory. And touch wood, things had gone well since then.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, you were able to lose 60 billion rand and not have to change your lifestyle. Most people. But,
well, first, I didn't live a lifestyle that was reflective of the extra 60 billion.
Yeah, that's very important.
That's where it starts.
Yeah. And how did it affect, so I mean, after you've lost all this money, does it not, like going into future deals, do you do more due diligence? Has your approach changed at all?
I suppose, yeah. Well, I mean, not more due diligence. I mean, I always explain to people I didn't really have to do all the due diligence because all the ratings agencies and the institutional investors and the banks that went before me, they did all the due diligence. You must remember Steinhoff was a darling of the market when I got there. So, no, it didn't really change my way of operating at all.
Yeah. And okay, so then Steinhoff happens, and now I also wanted to ask you about Wilgenhof. So
yes.
What's it? 2024. It's two and a bit years ago now.
Yeah.
All this news comes out, and it's obviously a place that you hold special to your heart, like most of us. What were your first thoughts when all of this comes out and the potential for a closure?
No, well, my thoughts were very clear. I mean, as I told you earlier on, there was always, and it's quite a good tension. There was always this sort of Wilgenhof is something a little bit apart. You know, whenever there's a problem, you can more or less almost accept that it comes from Wilgenhof. You know, I dealt in my time, I was for years the chairman of the old Wilgenhof Bond. And occasionally I got dragged in because somebody had done something irresponsible, and there were threats of expulsion. And so I thought this is just another one of those incidents. And but I soon realized that, and the first day after the news break, the newspapers were on to me and I gave an interview and I said, look, I accept, for one, that the things that we did in my time that were perfectly acceptable, they would not have been acceptable to somebody like my wife, who went to UCT and, you know, would probably consider some of the things we did barbaric. But in the spirit of the time, it was perfectly acceptable.
It was a different
We
period.
thought it was a big joke.
Yeah.
But the world had changed. And therefore it is time for an institution like Wilgenhof also to change. I think, with the greatest of respect, that the way the issue was handled by the management of the university leaves a lot to be desired. I think there were a lot of political undertones, and it was in the zeitgeist that, the world had changed, and people out there must see that Stellenbosch is also changing. Now, if Wilgenhof, which is kind of like a symbol in a way, can be made to become a Rhodes must fall, that's where it went wrong. So yeah, I got a little bit involved. I tried throughout to prevent litigation and to try and find common ground. And I think in the end, everybody has to agree. I had very little to do with it, but that the right outcome was reached. A point was made, but it wasn't a destructive point, as it threatened to be at one stage. There was talk of converting Wilgenhof to a female-only residence. I mean, all the other rumors that were flying around, changing the name and all that sort of stuff. I think in the end, common sense prevailed.
Was there ever any talk? I mean, there's obviously been a lot of successful alumni from Stellenbosch, some from Wilgenhof, but some from other men's residences as well. And in recent times, there's been a push against Wilgenhof, but also just general men's residence culture.
Right.
Was there talk behind closed doors between some of the top alumni from other residences as well, in terms of how the Wilgenhof case was handled? And, a lot of these people, I'm sure like yourself, donate to the university.
Yeah.
What were the conversations like behind closed doors?
No, I wasn't really party to a lot of conversations behind closed doors, so I don't know what all that. There are always, when something like that happens, there are different groups with different views. There was a strong move at one stage to try and buy Wilgenhof from the university. Now, there's an interesting history. I'm sure you guys know about it. Way back in the 1950s, the university decided to demolish the old Wilgenhof building and to build a new Wilgenhof elsewhere, not on the same site. They wanted to utilize that site for an academic building. Dr. Craven and others then went to the university and asked, what is the value of the site? And the value was £15,000. Now, way back in the 1950s, that was a fortune. And at that stage, there were only like 1,000 old Wilgenhofers over the 80 years. Not even 80 years. It was 2003 to say 2055, so 52 years. And they did a deal with the University Council that those people, the alumni of Wilgenhof, would gather £15,000 over a couple of years and give the money to the university. But in exchange, the new Wilgenhof must be built on that site and in the same pattern, skewed to the street and with a backflaky windows and everything. That's the history. And they managed, that's a gigantic effort. If you think of the people who had to raise that money at that time, they only managed to raise it literally with days to spare. Yeah. But they did it. And I was fortunate that I was one of the first new people in the new Wilgenhof. I moved in September 1963.
Do you think if it came down to it, the alumni would have purchased?
Well, I don't know. Well, in a sense, I was going to make that case depending, how it developed, to say, but, in a sense, Wilgenhof had already bought it because it paid £15,000.
Yeah.
Way back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
But it's not a practical solution, I think. Regrettably not.
It's something that's happened sort of last 20 years is sort of government infrastructure has somewhat declined.
Yes.
And there's been this push towards private initiatives for everything, private
Yes.
security,
Yes.
private companies fixing up potholes.
Sure.
And I recently saw they've just unveiled this new private, like Boer University, Afrikaans University in Pretoria. I don't know if you saw.
Yeah,
like
I'm aware of it. Yeah, academia or something.
Like a 1.2 billion rand plan.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the future, private universities in South Africa?
Whether that is the future, I don't know, but that it has a place is undoubtedly so. I mean, we know that the state appears, not only here, but all over the world, to find great difficulty with state resources to provide the educational facilities for all the people that want to have them. So I think the private sector has a big role to play in the educational field, and I'm all for it.
Yeah. And in terms of the future of Stellenbosch and other, the mainstream universities now?
Well, they will, like mainstream universities all over the world, who are struggling, eh? I mean, it's you read the reports on universities that are 1,000 years old that have problems.
Yeah.
So it's not unique to South Africa or to Stellenbosch, but I think all these institutions have a place in the modern world.
Mm-hmm. And when you see these problems, I mean, you're well connected. Do you ever talk to Cyril, to some of these politicians, and say?
I do, yeah. I don't talk too often to politicians, but I know people and occasionally have conversations. But I always make this point when people ask me this question. I served on the President's Economic Advisory Council for 13 years, where some 40 business people, between 20 and 40, met 4 times a year with the state president and members of cabinet to talk about what should we do to get the economy going and to, create prosperity and growth.
Yeah.
And in those 13 years, it became very clear to me that business people talking to politicians has very little influence. Regrettably, they march to different drummers. But that doesn't mean that one shouldn't talk, that you shouldn't give advice, that you shouldn't always tender help. I mean, I happen to know the president. I've known him since 1980. We're not friends, but we know each other. I happen to know some of the other top-ranking politicians, and we talk. But I don't have great expectations that, the wisdom will be taken on board.
Today,
But I mean, South Africa changed in the 1980s because people talked.
Yeah. How self-aware are they of the problems going on? They surely know about it. Is there an effort on their side, or are their hands constrained? Or
well, one has to accept that I don't hold the view that all politicians are crooks and incompetent. But one has to accept, the old adage that politics remain the art of the possible. Because you're dealing with human beings. Look what's happening in the UK, the mother of democracy. Yeah. They're now having their 7th prime minister in 10 years. It's just chaos. And that country is in so much trouble. I'd rather be here dealing with our problems at the moment. If I were a political leader, I'd rather deal with these problems than deal with those.
What do you think about the push in recent times for celebrities and businessmen going into politics? You've obviously got Trump.
The history, Trump is a glaring example of business people getting into politics. It's not a happy one, certainly in South Africa.
Because
Never
I've seen
really
there's
worked.
now this push. I mean, the ANC is potentially looking for a new leader, and
Yeah.
some calls for Patrice Motsepe. You know,
I happen to think Patrice would be a fantastic choice. But I'm friendly with him. I'm not a friend. We don't see that much of each other. But if he asked me, I would say, Patrice, why would you want to do it to yourself? But the point is that would be fantastic. But I think there are other choices. There are other black leaders that are not such revered business people or multi-billionaires the way Patrice is, but that could do the job.
yeah,
And hopefully, sooner or later, you know, with all these coalitions and things, maybe I happen to know one or two of them that I've had spoken to, that would be wonderful. And it would be great for a while to have somebody who's not from one of the political parties playing a role as a state president.
yeah.
I think it would be great, but the likelihood of that happening, because politicians look after politicians.
Do you think we're starting to turn a corner in South Africa?
Yes, I see the green shoots everywhere.
You've been
And I'll
saying
tell
that
you
for a
why.
while, though. You've always been an optimist.
Yeah, I've always been an optimist, but I'll tell you why. I often quote this. My late father-in-law, when the reaction against apartheid started gaining momentum with sanctions and, you know, cutting us out of things, he always said that people are wasting their time because apartheid will eventually crash under its own unworkability. It is simply not workable. Now, I hold the same view. South Africa's problems can be solved not overnight, but in a very short space of time. Because there is none of our problems that cannot be solved by the private sector. Private sector can sort everything out. Can sort out the electricity, the water, the roads. The government just has to get out of the way. But that's where ideology comes in. And now where are the green shoots? You are seeing the reality dawning on the ANC government that they can't do anything. They can't get the power situation sorted out, electricity. They can't get the water sorted out. They can't get the ports sorted out. Etc., etc. Sorry, I've got a bad throat.
No worries.
So sooner or later, reality will drive the solution, not ideology. Reality will drive it.
And do you think we still have a job to try and push our politicians to do something? And what would those changes be to facilitate?
Telling them that, look, a government's primary job is the security and safety of its people. That's what the government should do. Secondly, foreign relations. That's what a government should do. A government shouldn't run airlines and ports and trains. That's not the government's job.
Yeah.
Leave it to the private sector. I make that point often. I'm going to make it in a speech again in August. That will go national. That people often think South Africa is like all the other failed African states. But they forget the one thing that South Africa has that those countries never had is a very large, vibrant, dynamic private sector that can cure everything.
Yeah. But at what stage does the private sector give up? I mean...
Well, they should never give up unless, you know, they give up on the country. I mean,
But
and there are people who've done that, obviously.
we've obviously, we've lost talent who've gone overseas.
That's the one thing I didn't foresee
You didn't
in
think
my
people would leave?
optimism. I did not foresee that we would lose so many people. But you know, the world's also a funny place. We lose those people, but there's not a vacuum there. We're also getting a lot of immigrants people who are seeing opportunities here. And we're seeing a lot of South Africans who had left coming back. I hope that will escalate.
And so, in your investments, is South Africa still your primary?
I've got 95% of my assets in South Africa.
And you don't plan on changing that?
I don't intend changing that dramatically.
And then one final thing I wanted to ask you is your opinion on sort of concentration versus diversification, which I think it's pushed by financial advisors, diversify. And it's good, but concentration builds wealth.
Yeah, it's like, one of the other topics we touched on just now, private universities, state universities. There's place for everything. There's no hard and fast rule. I mean, I happen to build, I think it could be argued that I built what I managed to build by concentrating in Pep and Shoprite, which is entirely true because I always had other things as well. Today I am more diversified, but so there's no one rule fits all.
Okay. And what would you say to a young person wanting to build something in South Africa today? Piece of advice.
The first thing I would say is this is where the opportunities are. This is South Africa, and Africa is where the opportunities are, with all its problems, all its challenges, but that's what makes it fun.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.